Famine, angry citizens, coalitions, and incompetent leaders aren't a thing you would usually expect from a Minecraft server, but those words are the main benefactors that brought war to the desert of TerraTales. But before we can cover that, let's meet the different sides of it. Sefadiir first formed as two different places. Sefad, a small fortified town formed by Mocha, a migrator who originally came from a faraway nation of Macedonia, and Ir, a religious platform city formed by Slaza, a local priest who preached the words of Eleanor in his pantheon. Both existed on different sides of the Naval River and shared supplies like food and armor. They both remained two different entities until a rogue group from the north called Barhead, a group of cannibalistic goat demons, started raiding Ir. Ir asked for help from Sefad, which complied with the request and scared away the Barhead. Following this raid, Sefad and Ir united to form the city of Sefadiir. Bridges were made between the two parts of the city, and soon they gained control over the Naval River's entrance. Shortly after the formation of the United Sefadiir, a great famine hit the world, a lack of trade and economic collaboration between the nations of the world causing a lack of food worldwide. Sefadiir was hurt greatly from this, seeing as they weren't able to grow food due to the harsh weather conditions in the desert. In response to this, player username _DJM8 collected a group of men and sailed west to form a colony. The colony, later named Movilia, helped solve the famine in Sefadiir by importing food from the grass-rich western plains to the mainland of Sefadiir. Neshredi and Sefadiir always had an ongoing conflict of rivalry going on between them. Throughout their entire existence, Sefadiir and Neshredi argued about the hill which they both settled on. The first meeting between the two nations had a talk about Sefadiir becoming a vassal state of Neshredi, which Sefadiir denied. The tensions between the two nations came to an all-time high when Queen Noth of Neshredi attempted to build an ugly wall and multiple structures on the hill between Sefadiir and Neshredi. Sefadiir forces soon showed up to investigate the walls, only to then beat the queen nearly to death and to throw her back to Neshredi from the gates. The king of Neshredi, Spanish reign, was furious at this news. He gathered all of his men and geared them up. A few hours later, a Sefadiiri patrol officer, the Crush Inc., noticed the Neshredi charging upon the walls of Sefadiir. He quickly alerted the Sefadiir military and a small army of soldiers organized to protect the town. The Neshredi soldiers towered up to the walls and swarmed into the fort. The fierce fighting broke out between the two parties, which ended up with 2 Sefadiiri deaths and 7 Neshredi deaths. The remaining Neshredi fighters fled out the fort back to their walls, where they were protected. The Sefadiiris responded to this by placing the heads of the fallen soldiers onto their wall to taunt the Neshredis. Days later, the Neshredi queen returned with some of her goons and started to attack Sefadiiri patrol soldiers completely unprovoked. This made the Sefadiiris even madder when the queen built the wall. Instead of shooting back to make the queen stop, the Sefadiiri men broke into Neshredi to attack. They entered the city through a weak point in the back, and the queen and her goons quickly caught on to them. The queen's goons fought the Sefadiiri men, but outnumbered, outskilled, and outgeared, the Sefadiiri men murdered the queen and her goons in the city and left. The king of Neshredi heard of this. Obviously furious, he once again gathered his men and stationed them on the walls. The Sefadiiris saw this and prepared for a second raid, prepared better than before. The Sefadiiris started shooting the men on the walls. The battle almost started, but then the Sefadiiri god of war, Among descended from the heavens in the form of player Palm to stop the fighting. Mad at this escalation, the Sefadiir men needed to think of a new way to threaten Neshredi, since now they knew Sefadiir is stronger than them militarily. And so, they decided to act upon the aggression by attacking Neshredi in a way harsher than before, and in a way never seen before. Now, you see, the world didn't have a unified currency, which meant each nation had their own currency. The Sefadiiri had Mokers, and the Neshredi had Ales. The Sefadiiris managed to get their hands on Ales, and, in combination with colonial help, started secretly counterfeiting them inside the Sniffer Temple. At the dead of night, Malex's squadron sneaked into the Neshredi and went to the market. They bought out every single thing in the market, from bed, clay, XP, and emptied the diamond exchange with the fake currency. Neshredi was now out of food and materials and suffered a major economic crisis following this. But during the various shenanigans that were happening between Neshredi and Sefadiir, the nation south of them was slowly falling apart internally. The Grand Duchy of Vercellia had multiple internal coups, causing the citizens of the nation to fall into a great famine. During this time of political instability and famine, a small group of Vercillian citizens fled to Sefadiir to request the king of Sefadiir, Moker, to invade Vercellia and to eradicate the corrupted leadership and to end the instability and famine. After a week of counseling between the king and his citizens, Moker had come to the decision to offer Vercellia an ultimatum. The ultimatum arrived to Vercellia, and it said, "This is a message from Sefadiir Haniqdere to the Duke of Vercellia. We are aware of the situation in your country, internal coups, famine, instability, and corruption. We hereby give you an ultimatum. Give up your leadership of Vercellia and join Sefadiir, or face death and forced annexation. You have 3 days to reply to this ultimatum." As soon as the ultimatum was read, in the throne room, the entire government of Vercellia fell into chaos. Multiple leaders sprung up to try and take the place of Nihilus as Nihilus fled from the country. 3 days had passed since the ultimatum, and the Vercellians were yet to send a response. Moker and the citizens of Sefadiir knew well what was coming next. The Sefadiir's citizens were trained swiftly, armored up, and geared. Sefadiir was ready to march on Wineport. Volunteers gathered from all around Sefadiir to fight in this war. After all, Sefadiiri men were people of war, so they were naturally excited for this. But in the meantime, the Duke of Vercellia, Nihilus, had returned from his disappearance. He quickly mustered up a coalition of 3 countries, Vercellia, Neshredi, and Preskova, and gained financial aid from Rawak. They set up defenses around the capital of Wineport as fast as they could to prepare for the Sefadiiri army. Within 3 hours, the entire city of Wineport was surrounded by a tall and thick wall of deep slate. At noon of the same day, the Sefadiiri army reached the outskirts of Wineport and prepared for the battle. The plan was simple: rush into the city, break into the palace of the Duke, occupy the throne room, crown Moker as the supreme leader of Vercellia, and camp it out until the war was over. But as Sefadiir was preparing for its offensive, the coalition soldiers started shooting down arrows at their camp. The war was on. The coalition forces led by Duke Nihilus were shooting arrows down at the Sefadiiri army, which was led by Hanikra Moker and General Shmalex. The attackers swiftly returned fire, pushing a bit as they shot back. Through a stroke of genius, Shmalex counted up the coalition fighters, only to realize that all of them were at the front shooting arrows, which meant the back flank was completely open. Shmalex quickly informed Moker of this, and Moker ordered the army to retreat. The coalition fighters were celebrating, thinking that they had scared away the attackers. But while their celebrations went on, the attackers walked north towards Eleonira and then to the back side of Wineport in order to flank the defenders. As the attackers reached the unguarded Wineport side, Moker started bridging up, leading his army into the city. The defenders' celebrations quickly ended when they got the notification that a capture block was placed within their land. they swiftly ran to the other side of the wall, only to find the attackers' small Bristol fort and capture block, knowing well that if they don't do anything, the capture block will finish charging and they will lose some of their town, and so recharge the attackers. The fierce fighting started. People falling off and running back into the wall, that being not an uncommon occurrence during this fighting. But during the first clash of forces, the Duke of Vercellia Nihilus got hit in the leg by attacker Mani, causing him to fall down and fall hostage to the attackers. The attackers celebrated his capture and almost immediately killed the Duke, the first blood of the war. The fighting continued for 10 more minutes until the capture block went off, the Sefadiir attackers being in lead. Moker placed their second capture block in the heart of Wineport. The fighting got fiercer during the second capture block, but just like the first one, it ended up in a Sefadiir capture. After the second capture block had been fully charged, the Sefadiris realized their armors were badly damaged and decided to retreat. The first battle of the war had ended. The attack on Wineport was a Sefadiir success, which left the coalition demoralized. The attackers returned to their town to fix their sets and swords. But in the meantime, the coalition got further reinforcements from their nation and allies and organized a counterattack. When the Sefadiir men finished repairing their armor, they got the notification that a capture block had been placed in their town. The block was placed in the western port, and in there the entire coalition army. The army of Sefadiir now turned into defenders, raining down arrows on the attackers. The arrows didn't do much, and they all ended up charging down towards the port. At this moment, Moker had a bit of a still quotation marks. But anyways, the Sefadiir defenders couldn't destroy the capture block, and the port ended up being captured by the coalition. At this point, not much is known about what happened to the fighters of the coalition, who disappeared all of a sudden because the next capture block, placed by them, only had 4 people protecting it. The second capture block was way simpler to destroy for the defenders, destroying it in 2 minutes. But just like that, the counterattack had failed. Small groups of 1 to 3 coalition soldiers were scattered around and ended up being hunted down. Sefadiir ended up victorious once again, but this time the coalition armor sets and morale had been broken, literally. The Duke of Vercellia came forward to Sefadiir in order to surrender. Vercellia was soon annexed into Sefadiir, tripling Sefadiir's size. And the rest, well, it's history. All of these were true events on the server of TerraTales. If you want to take part in future wars, world building, economy, and maybe even run your own nation, join the new TerraTales server in the description below, or this Discord.